Vishnu, you got a new mic, and I am so thankful for that.
You can finally hear me now. Another podcast in the books with a new mic. Life is
Wow.
good.
Wow, you're so smooth, silky smooth. I just keep talking, man. I feel like I'm getting ASMR right now.
MLOps ASMR. See, this is our new content stream.
Yeah, we brought in a content manager. They told us just to talk softly and about models going into production. Everything is smooth, monitoring all your KPIs, all your OKRs, they're all hit. We can try and throw in as much business jargon as possible in one sentence. Anyway, we talked with Mark today, man. This was really cool. I was stoked. Everything he said. I mean,
Yeah,
what'd you think?
I thought that it was a great conversation. Mark is a really thoughtful guy, from his approach to content, from his approach to communication at work, to the structured way that he thinks about data. I was really impressed with how Mark had an answer for everything we threw at him and had thought about it really hard. And you can see that shine through, which
Hmm.
resulted in really helpful and sort of detailed answers
Hmm.
that I think everybody listening will really appreciate. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I was fascinated by some of these frameworks that he threw out at us. The tribe framework is incredible. He talked to us about that at the end. I'll give a little bit of a spoiler. Tribe stands for talk, requirements, iterate, build, evangelize. He breaks down the importance of each one of these and how you go about it. And that's it, man. Before we jump into the full conversation with Mark, I want to give a quick blurb about the merchandise that we got on the MLOps community website. Go and get yourself a t-shirt or a hoodie. We just made aprons, and they say Kubernetes is a gateway drug. So if
Aprons? Are you kidding me?
I know you're a big
That's
cooker,
so cool.
I know you like to cook, and this is the perfect cookout apron that shows all of your friends how cool you are or how much of a nerd you are, whatever you want to go for. But Kubernetes is a gateway drug. Bad things happen to good data. All the good classic designs we got on there. Go have a look, have a gander, maybe buy something. It is on the website, and we're linking to it in the description. Let's jump into the conversation with Mark. The story of how we met. You came to the in-person SF meetup, and
Yup.
I think Miko invited you, and you randomly were
Uh,
there.
yeah,
And
Mikiko and Joe Reyes who are there. So I
there we go.
shout out to Harpreet. He does the
Yeah.
artist data science office hours every week, and it's been showing up since the beginning of the pandemic. And we've created like this group of friends, just jamming out about data every week. And so like
So
I'm talking
good.
to these people every single week, and I found out they're gonna be in SF to hang out. So I had to come by because I live in the Bay Area. And it was just so awesome kind of seeing the people that I talk to online all the time, whether it's on LinkedIn or Zoom chats or like in the Slack
Hmm.
group that you have, MLOps community. Such a cool kind of coincidence considering that we've been locked up for the past 2 years.
Exactly. And then all of a sudden, it's like, wow, you're an actual person. You're not a screen.
Exactly.
So we did that. We met there, and I was intrigued by what you were doing, and I had no idea the amount of stardom you have on LinkedIn at that time.
It's strange. It's strange. I wouldn't necessarily call it stardom. I'm just a guy on the internet and I post every day and people have just been resonating. And what's funny is I started posting on LinkedIn because I was laid off in the middle of the pandemic. I was just like, I just want attention from
Amazing.
employers. And it worked so well that it's kept it up. And I went from like I think what 1,000 connections to now I'm over 15K, which is just kind of wild. And it's really turned into an opportunity just to really refine my thinking about data and ML every single
Yeah.
day, but also connect with amazing people and talk, whether it be podcasts, other posts. And it's wild. It's like having 15,000 mentors basically
Mm.
to help you on your journey.
Is that followers or connections?
So I think I switched. LinkedIn recently created creator mode where
Okay.
you switch from connections to followers. And
Uh huh.
so I last time I checked, I think I'm like I think 5,000 of them are connections, and then
Okay.
10,000 are followers.
Okay.
So yeah, I prefer the followers over connections because,
Sure.
say for instance, you have like a viral post.
Mm-hmm.
I'll have a whole bunch of people to connect. I just accept everyone. So I'm like, cool, like more
Why
people
not?
to talk to, great. But the thing is, your LinkedIn feed gets so crowded with like a whole bunch
Right.
of junk that you
Yeah.
move away from like all the kind of like the thought leaders, get like this nice feed of like what's happening in space to just like a lot of noise. So
Right.
that's why I prefer the followers.
Yep.
And
I
that's
don't
why I
have.
asked. It's like, I think nowadays, LinkedIn, it's such a crucial part of our information diet professionally,
Mhm.
right? Like what you're hearing. I know Demetrius is a LinkedIn super user. And I guess to our listeners, you wouldn't think about talking about this, on the MLOps podcast where we talk about machine learning, but I think it's kind of material because, as a machine learning professional myself, so much of how I hear about trends, about what's happening in the industry, about who's doing what is through it. And so I'm kind of curious. I'd definitely love to continue to learn through this conversation how you've used LinkedIn in the most sort of effective ways so that I can learn and so our listeners can learn about how to leverage such an essential information platform.
Definitely. Oh man, that's a really good question because I've been thinking a lot about this, and I think the main thing is like understanding what role you want to have on LinkedIn. You don't need to be a content creator to leverage LinkedIn. You don't need to be
Yeah.
posting every single day, and creating content. That's actually pretty stressful if you're not really into it. The thing is, I try to
Yeah.
post content Monday through Friday, every weekday, and that's exhausting doing that for 2 years.
Yeah.
And my main thing is I won't post if I'm not having fun. So, um, I try to make it as fun as possible to post. And here's the thing: if you're just not having fun posting, your content's gonna show it. It's gonna feel forced. And so there's other ways that you can really engage. I think one of the best ways is commenting. That's actually one of the best ways to grow your reach is finding these top accounts, and identifying people who create that great content because their focus is being connectors and, creating content that starts conversation. So by you commenting, you're one helping their reach, and so they're going to be really appreciative. They may be willing to comment or even talk to you through DMs, through that. But more importantly, is like now you can share your expertise. People may be asking
Mm-hmm.
questions, say like, "Hey, I'm working on this ML problem under this use case. I'm considering X or Y." And you can share your expertise, and people will really appreciate that. So that's one of the goals for my content is being a bridge. I'm by no means an expert. I've been in data science for like almost 3 years. There's no way you can be an expert in that time. But I'm really curious and I love talking to people. And so I try to create content where it's like a meeting place, a bridge where, hey, this is what I'm currently learning, what I've learned so far. So people who are coming up, I'm a little ahead, they can see what I'm doing and learn from. But also people who are way more experienced, like the people who are doing ML since like 2012 kind of thing, before that cool article came out that made us look all cool. The HBR article, they come in and they're like just dropping gems and wisdom, right? And
Right.
so, I think that's the key thing is to understand your place. Do you want to be the person that's dropping gems and wisdom through comments? Do you want to create content yourself to really drive that attention to you? Or, do you just want to lurk and just identify the right people to follow? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the key thing is like knowing where you want to be at and then just showing up every single day. And over time you'll see kind of like who's really talking and actually building versus people who are just kind of regurgitating kind of like memes of like content that's out every single day.
I think that's a very informative answer. And I think your point about how to think about what role LinkedIn plays for you and what role you want to play, I think that level of intentionality is crucial because otherwise it just adds to information overload and sort of
Exactly.
digital addiction, right? Because it can just feel like there's always another post. I think I would love to understand from your standpoint, you've been a creator now. And, as aspiring machine learning data professionals, I think one thing that we're all interested in is career opportunities, right?
Hmm.
And being active on social platforms can be an awesome way of finding and
Yep.
ultimately being found for career opportunities. At the same time, it can be sort of a long payoff before that can happen for you. And it can seem like a lot of work to really invest in a social platform for one day maybe getting a job, but maybe not so as immediate as spending another hour on lead code or spending another hour on system design interviews or whatever else. So my question to you is, to the aspiring professionals out there, can you tell them a little bit more about how you think about that investment of time spent on creating and work, on a social platform, as opposed to other things that could be done in order to advance your professional trajectory?
Definitely. So I think one thing about the content, at least I try to create, is that I try to teach people. When I first started, my main thing is I want to help at least one person through a post. I don't care if it gets like hundreds of likes or comments and stuff like that. Now I care about that a little bit more because now I'm like trying to fine tune what resonates with my community more. So I have different metrics, but earlier on the side, when I'm just more so trying to figure out the content, is like, how can I create content that just helps someone? And so if you found yourself like when you teach people, you find that you learn way more because to feel comfortable teaching, you have to be, one, know the topic and then process it and then communicate in a way for other people to understand. And so when I create content, especially like the longer form ones where I'm like, hey, here's this project I did. You can follow along. Here's this GitHub, right? That takes so much time and thinking through how to like properly explain a concept to someone else that I learn way more. So it's just as good as leak code. Maybe I'm not gonna crush it at the next technical interview because it's testing memorization of these things, right? But I can think through a project and explain it to stakeholders. So for me, it's not necessarily optimizing on technical skills, it's optimizing on the soft skills of being able to share my technical expertise. And so what I do with my content many times is that I'll put out a post and many times it's me testing out messaging of a thing I'm working on at work and seeing how can I explain and what resonates. And I get feedback from the community, like what does and doesn't. And then I go back to my job and I kind of look like a rock star because I explain it so well and do all this. And in reality, I workshopped it with 15,000 people, right? Most 15,000 people don't see my post every single time, but you get the idea. Like,
Sure.
I think it's how you frame it. It's really focusing on the reflection side of things.
Well, I can't tell you how many times I've seen some of your posts and it keeps me in the loop. It's like I feel like sometimes I'll feel like an old dad who's all of a sudden like, oh, TikTok's cool. And then I got my daughter who's doing TikTok and now I'm like, I'm a cool kid too. I can do these TikTok dances. And when I see your posts, sometimes I'm like, oh, people don't like that piece of software. I won't say any names or like, oh, this framework is now stylish. Okay, cool. And for me, it's very helpful because a lot of times I am very much in the MLOps world, and I like to say that I have this huge gap when it comes to like the machine learning and data science world, as closely as they are together, MLOps and machine learning. Sometimes I just am out of the loop with it, and so I totally get to stay in the loop with your content, and I appreciate that. And I also can say that I 100% agree with you on putting yourself out there to be able to have people find you and get a job. I mean, the whole reason that I continued with the community was when Dot Science back in the day went out of business, the company that was like, hey, we should start a community. And so I was the one trying to start it, and there was like 20 people in the MLOps community. From there, what happened is Dot Science went out of business, and then I thought, I wonder if I go and I interview every like CEO of the MLOps companies that are out there, can that get me my foot in the door to try and get a job at these companies? And so
That's
I
smart.
fully understand your strategy on that. It is a great strategy. I tell people all the time that reach out and they're like, yeah, I'm trying to get a job in the business. I tell them either start a blog, start a podcast, start something that you can have an excuse to reach out to people for and get their take on things. And then you've created a relationship. So
Definitely. And the way I kind of view it, and I was very intentional. So like I said, I was laid off middle of 2020 during the pandemic. And so I had two options. Either I applied for jobs or I just kind of did this wild thing. I was like, I'm gonna give it a month. I'm just create a piece of content every single day. And people are gonna apply to me. And essentially what I did was create a sales funnel. So ADA, awareness, interest, desire, action. Awareness. All my content is bringing awareness about my skill set and my knowledge on this space and how I can solve your problems for your company. And so people are aware I'm looking for a job. People are aware I'm creating this content and this is my skill. And so I started having DMs come to me like, hey, we're interested in you. Or people on my comment, hey, this company might be interested in you. So we get that interest, that first screen. Desire, you're doing that interview process. So how can I explain my skill set? I interviewed for multiple people. Some interviews I bombed. I didn't get that desire right. Some interviews like at Humu, I really knocked it out of the park. And then action, sign the offer letter, right? And the reason why I like that framework, that model, is now you have levers within your kind of funnel to think through your job search where, hey, I'm getting this awareness piece down, but like this interest, like I'm not getting past the phone screen, right? And so now you work less on the awareness piece because you got a system down. Now you focus more so on the how can I better communicate my skill set that I do have, right? Or how can I get better leads? So like I'm bringing awareness to like maybe like I'm getting awareness of all these different MLOps companies, but actually I'm just a data scientist. So like, maybe I'm getting the wrong community, right? So there's different things you can do and pull levers. So that's how I kind of thought about it. And what's interesting is now that I'm not job searching, this is actually working on the other side for hiring. People are becoming aware of our job postings because of the content I put out, or because I build a following. I can put out a job posting and be like, hey, we're hiring, we're looking for XYZ. And there's been multiple times my colleagues have said like, hey, this person applied because like they saw your content on LinkedIn.
That's awesome. That's so cool because that is one of the hardest things to do right now in this space. So
It's
your
hiring
colleagues
so
probably
hard.
love you. Yeah. Yeah. So there is something that I wanted to talk about because you put, and when we talked, you mentioned how data maturity is a spectrum that takes time to traverse for companies to ultimately be capable of getting models into production or productionizing machine learning. Can you break
Yep.
that down a little bit for us?
Definitely. So the thing is, like, I think there was this thought early in the data science where like you just hire data scientists and then you have ML and you have these models and they work this magic, right? You do your Python notebooks and they're able to solve these kind of wild problems, right? And what we found out, and this is why MLOps is popping up, is like you hire a bunch of data scientists and they couldn't do anything because they just didn't have the data to actually do something, or they did have the data and they created the model, but then like they just didn't have the engineering skills to put it into production. And so like there's these like spectrums of problems you have where you have to be very intentional about machine learning and using data for your company. And it's not like a flip the switch thing. It's a lot of technical kind of infrastructure improvements over time to really solve these problems. And more importantly is if you're not just solely a data company, if you are like a company that has like this value proposition that so happens to use data to provide that, right? You're going to be battling between building features or building out your customer base versus building infrastructure. And so many times, engineering infrastructure, that's very clear. Data infrastructure is a relatively newish thing. We've always had like database and data warehouses, but like it's a completely different game with cloud computing. And now there's like ETL versus ELT and all these different new terms that like they have the modern data stack as well. So like, and you look at that, there's a picture of what, 10,000 vendors of the modern data stack. It's a very confusing place. So how do you go from like A to like Z, where Z's like your Google, uploading ML and doing all those things, right? And so I'll stop right there, make sure you have any questions before I kind of go into like the different stages that I see.
Nothing from me.
Nothing from me.
Vishnu?
Okay,
All right.
perfect.
Keep going.
Awesome. I'm trying to make sure I have that balance of not going on monologue. So, so for me, the different stages that I kind of see for data maturity is that, early stage, you're just a bunch of business executives and you're like, I have gut feelings. I've seen the market. I have a lot of domain knowledge, right? And this is why I believe what should happen. I can get you pretty far, right? Especially if you have a lot of domain knowledge. I think a great example is like in healthcare, right? There's a lot, now my background's in healthcare, and there's a lot of domain knowledge about the healthcare industry, and you can get really far. That's actually how I got my first data science job, was because of my healthcare domain knowledge. Because that got me far enough to like, all right, Mark, you don't have the coding skills yet, but like you know about this domain well enough, right? So you have that aspect of it. Then you move forward, like, all right, we have this domain knowledge, and now we have a product out, or we're able to access some data, right? We have data available, but it's like in a really raw state. Only a few people can really access it or even work with it to provide insights. And you have this bottleneck where you have executives saying, hey, I want to know XYZ. And instead of being a quick dashboard or something like that, it takes like 20 hours to muck through the data, pull it, get it clean, and provide that insight. It's not really scalable. And I think the next step is you have your database, you have this data, you're getting this ingestion. From there, I think the next step that really sets the foundation for kind of building a data maturity and data strategy is that you have a data warehouse. So you have things coming from the database, and then you move to the data warehouse. And data warehouse is designed for analytics, right? So the database is set for like, I'm thinking like you have a web app, right? Read, write really fast. You don't want people waiting forever to click a link, right? That data is structured in a way to be optimized for a product, right? Or wherever your service is. But when it gets to the data warehouse, this is a different game. You're optimizing for it to do analytics, to really pull that data, understand it. And so that's when I see companies really starting to accelerate and get serious about their kind of data strategies when they build that data warehouse, when they think through that. Then they can start asking questions of like, all right, well, let's do some more SQL. Let's pull this data more frequently. Let's create some data models, some data marts to make it easier to pull this data, right? And so what happens and why that's such a huge foundational piece is that now you increase access of data throughout the org. You can build dashboards on top of this data warehouse. You can, have data analysts work with things. And now people are consuming data more internally. And that drives this hunger for data. What more can we do with data? What more could we learn? And now it's top of mind for people. Like, oh, we can actually do this. And from there, now you can start moving to, well, we actually have data. We're doing statistics and analytics. We're observing what happened in the past. And then you can start getting to predictions. That's when the ML is even possible to start doing those things. And you build these ML models. You start off really easy first. And you're able just to show like kind of like proof of concepts, like, wow, this is amazing. And then you move further along, and then you kind of get into the MLOps. So like, all right, well, we have this model. We want to put in production. We want to put in our product. How do we solve that? And then you kind of invest in infrastructure. And the thing is, if you go all the way to that final step first, all the steps that happened before, one is really hard to do, but two, you contextualize for your company why it's important, why it's worthwhile to invest so much time and resource. Like ML engineers are expensive folks, data scientists are expensive folks. To have a team of that, like, especially if you're a startup, right? That's gonna be a hard sell unless you can make it clear why it's a competitive advantage for your company. And so that's kind of like these stages. And then at the final end, I really like to think of like the big tech companies like the Airbnbs, Googles, Facebooks, right? They're in a league of their own. For that data maturity, they're setting the pace of data maturity. And so I think many companies try to strive to that. I think that's the wrong approach because they're dealing with a scale that most companies aren't dealing with. And so you can look at them for like what's best practice and what's emerging. But I think looking at other companies, I think a great example will be like the New York Times. Seeing their engineering blogs are really interesting because they're a traditional company. They're not set out to be like this industry leader in technology, but they're scaling up their efforts. And so I've read blogs from them that's been really interesting. So you can find those smaller organizations and see how they traverse data maturity. You can get some really cool insights how you can apply to your own organization.
So my company, Mark, is along the same sort of trajectory right now. We're an early stage startup. I've worked primarily in early stage startups, and I think, the maturity sort of path that you laid out, I think what occurs to me when you talk about the whole journey, the narrative journey, is that, it's, we use this term a lot, infrastructure, right? But those steps that you're talking about are fundamental to the progression of how data is used in an organization. And, I'll give a big shout out to a book called The Informed Company. I don't know if you've read it.
I haven't, but I have to check it out now.
Yeah, it's by some people that are now at Atlassian, and it is a great company about the blocking and tackling. Or it's a great book about the blocking and tackling, how to create a data-driven organization. Talks through the particulars of all the things that you're talking about there. But I think what occurs to me is that that infrastructure of everything, right? Data models, database, data warehouse is so crucial to actually delivering machine learning value at scale. And it always surprises me, how the field of machine learning and machine learning engineering in some ways evolved while slightly divorced from that data context, right? I think like from the period of 2015 to 2020, there were a lot of companies that were hiring data scientists, machine learning engineers, and other types of professionals without that infrastructure in place. And I
Exactly.
don't know if you have an answer to this, but like, why do you think that is? Why do you think companies like that were hiring? I mean, we certainly do hear about the excitement around that field. Do you think that's what explained what led to that boom of sort of hiring the further along aspects of data professionals without investing in the fundamentals? Is that what explains it? Just excitement and I guess you could say enthusiasm.
I think so. And the thing is, I would more so defer to other books and more so look at holistically. I mean, I'm a researcher at heart, so I can't say like, hey, this is what's happening. But what I think what I've noticed is that, like you said, many companies are very excited. Like they saw ML as this thing you can do. But more importantly, is that ML is such a huge competitive advantage when you do it right. And so companies don't want to miss that. And so I think big shout out to Vin Fishista, who talks a lot about data strategy and how essentially companies who don't adopt ML are going to be left behind because of the competitive advantage it creates within the market. And so people want to invest in that. And so something you see a lot is around executives is like this digital transformation strategy, which is taking over place over decades, right? To really bring companies to the kind of this digital age where you have cloud computing, you have ML, AI, all those different things, right? But like you said, I think people really underestimated the challenges of just getting clean data to build an ML model. And more importantly, I think what people missed was, and I think this is why ML ops really popped up, is that okay, we have these models, but how do we get them to work all the time? Because when you're building your model, you have your test and train set, right? That's a very static kind of thing. But when you move towards actually putting it into a product and actually having the model run, you're assuming that the state of the world is staying the same. That's just not the case. The business may change, the data may change, right? And so there's these all these different challenges regarding that. And so I think people made the mistake of thinking they just need this unicorn data scientists, a few data scientists to run all this. And I think people are now starting to realize, or these companies, that you need a data team to allow this. And what we have is like these kind of nightmare situations where they hire a bunch of data scientists and they had nothing to do
Yeah.
because they didn't have the data,
And they
right?
got a
And
bad
so
rap.
I think that's a big reason why. What you said?
They got a bad rap.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I think right now, like the big buzz thing is data engineering,
Yeah.
because they had all these problems with data scientists not be able to do their work. So now like, oh, we need data now. So now they're focused on data engineering.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think the the emphasis on competitive advantage. I like that. I think that's a good call out. And how businesses think, oh, this is something that can be valuable, but often neglect. I mean, I think it's in every area, right? Sometimes we have this machine learning exceptionalism, but companies neglect essential aspects of human resources and finance as well too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what can we really expect in terms of thoughtfulness when applied to a much newer area in terms of machine learning? But yeah, it did, and I think Demetrius had a
So
question that he wanted to ask
yeah, I
you.
wanted to get into this idea, and I really like how you broke it down to like these steps that you can take, and how each step, every time you level up, it provides value to the business, and it also helps inform the next step. And one thing that I've been thinking a lot about, and anybody who listens probably has heard me say it too much, because I've started asking people quite a bit about what the fundamentals they think are for data products. And especially when we look at MLOps, what are those fundamental pieces? And the reason I bring this up, speaking of Joe at the beginning of the podcast, Joe just came out with his book, or is coming out with his book. I think,
So excited for
yeah,
that book.
the
It's
fundamentals
on
of data
preprint on
engineering.
O'Reilly.
For anybody that doesn't know, we'll put it in the link in the description below. And so I talk with him quite a bit about what are the fundamentals of MLOps, but then we go back and we even say like, okay, what are the fundamental pieces and building blocks that you need on each of these steps so that you can have a successful journey?
Definitely. So I think that building block, and I kind of alluded to this already, is having a strong data warehouse, but more importantly, increasing data access throughout the entire organization. Because you can't grow in data maturity if people just can't access the data. They can't improve their data skills. They can't improve their data understanding if they can't just access it. And so this really rang true for me at Humu. One of my earlier projects was, you know, that had the OKR, increased data access throughout the entire organization. And I love having this open-ended kind of thing. My manager's just like, go run for it, make it happen. And I was recently asked earlier at another event, what kind of like what's the most interesting AI or ML thing you've worked on? It was actually this data access piece, even though it was not related to ML directly. It's had such huge dividends in this piece. So just to give context, data was really hard at one point for us to really access. um Data science was able to access it and answer questions, but we had so many like kind of tickets being like, well, what about this and what about that, and we just became like a report churning team, even though we had this large skill set of more advanced skills. And so I just went around the org and just asked, three main questions: what current data do you use, um what's working well for you, and what's not working well for you. And asking every team about that, it became very clear what was the bottleneck and what was the game changer to the business impact if they had access to that data. And so I worked with mainly working with engineering to kind of get that data into the data warehouse. If missing data was there, getting that in the data warehouse as well, and then creating these data models to actually access this data a lot easier. Because again, it's in a state for web apps, right? So for products. So that's not a state for analytics, right? So really getting it from this really denormalized to a normalized state, and then creating these data marts and then surfacing it through dashboards, where people can quickly access the data, quickly answer these low hanging fruit questions. And, this doesn't sound like groundbreaking in advance, but it's so huge for this foundation because now you have a bunch of people who are domain experts who are working with the customer, who are the ones driving sales, driving expansions. They have access to this data, and now they're asking more questions. They have more informed questions. And so my job now is less thinking like, well, what's actually going to work? Well, people have access to the data now, and they're telling me what their pain points are now, or like what pain points customers are having now, or like this problem was surfaced that we just couldn't even think of because it's not working with the customer, right? And now they come to us, and now we have all these different use cases that ML could solve for that just wasn't a variable beforehand. And more importantly, because now people have this appetite for data, they're more willing to trust a product that can solve their problem that is ML based, whether it's internal or external.
So I think one of the things that's really coming out as a lesson from this discussion is build a foundation, right? Which
Yeah.
is have the foundational components of data maturity in order to do the cool things, do the MLOps, and do all the other things that we think that are interesting and that, ultimately drive the competitive advantage that we refer to. But building the foundation, A, is boring, which is why people neglect it.
Yeah.
And B, is not, it's not the stuff perhaps that promotions or stories or sort of heroism is made of. And I'm curious, from your perspective, how have you, as a senior data science at your senior data scientist at your company and in other environments, worked with non-data and data stakeholders to get them to buy into projects that were more oriented around foundational data capabilities than they were about machine learning or product value or near-term product value?
So again, going back to that data warehouse, I think that's gonna be the main takeaway. Just like get your data warehouse right, because then you can use that as a leverage point, to get people more interested in these opportunities. Well, I think the key thing is now that you have these nice kind of data marts available, you can start having more hackathons to say like, hey, here's this business problem that we have. What would it look like if we use ML to solve this? What would it look like if we built a data product around this? And more importantly is now people who work with customers are more empowered to provide kind of data insights back to their customers. So I think a really great example that kind of a strategic thing that I thought of, again, shout out to Vinny, he had a data strategy course that I took that completely changed my mind and how I thought about data. And one of the big projects I've been working on is how can I empower a customer success team? And a reason for that was, data and ML, whatever it is, at the core of it is just automating decisions. And, you know, there are some things that you just can't automate well. And that's when you interact directly with customers. That's a very high touch kind of component. And customer success is always interacting with customers. The way I tie that to the business is, well, customer success, and for people who may not be familiar with the term, I don't know if it's a tech term or something like that. When I talk to my parents who are not in tech, they're like, "What's customer success?" After sales, a team customer success takes a customer and makes sure they're happy, especially for B2B sales. And so their main metric is one, preventing churn and expanding deals. And so my thought process was, if I can use data to empower this group, I can drive increase of sales or expansions and reduce churn because I'm empowering them to be more competitive in the market and be more informed with their customers. And so that's how I kind of got that buy-in, is that I saw this kind of KPI, this metric at the end, and had to think, how can I automate all the hard parts, or automate all the easier parts so that the hard part that they excel at, this high touch thing, they can be really great at. And so that's where we kind of got this buy-in, because now this critical team who's driving revenue for our company is being empowered by data. They're doing more with data. They're able to make better decisions with data. And therefore now it's a critical piece of our company. And so now they're getting more investment. Well, like, all right, well, the data was a little bit late. How can we make that better? Or, hey, we need more data, right? How can we get these more improvements? And so if you provide value to a specific team that's driving revenue, you can use that as a leverage point to say like, well, if we have the data infrastructure more involved, we can do even more with them, right? And so it's being really strategic, not just in the market externally, but also internally within your company, of how you can really drive value and make it clear, not just to the data science team why it's important, but to other teams that are not data focused, as to why data can empower them.
It reminds me of this when we talked with Emmanuel from Stripe, and I asked him what kind of metrics he looks at for the machine learning platform that they have at Stripe, and he said, just tie yourself to some number that the company cares greatly about and make that number go up or down, whatever way you need it to go, and that will be successful. Like, people will understand the value from that. And so when you're talking about this, I just want to make sure that I understood it correctly, because it's like you're looking at the metrics that you're using, kind of like the way the customer success team looks at the metrics that they're using when they onboard a new client. They want to make sure that this client doesn't churn and that the client ultimately buys more and they consume more. And so you're saying, when I onboard a new person to my data platform, I want to make sure that that person or that team doesn't stop using my platform and ultimately they start using more of it. Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. And so a framework I've kind of talked about beforehand that just allows me to kind of get to this kind of component every single time I call it the tribe framework, which stands for talk, requirements, iterate, build, and evangelize. Talk. I did that roadshow asking, what are your pain points with data? Trying to get this information, like what's actually a pain point? Because we've always heard that, like, you build a model or you build a dashboard and there's this awesome, cool thing and no one uses it, right? So you talk to people, right? And this is kind of where the startup mindset comes from. Like, when you're building a company or you're bringing a product to market, you need to be talking to user interviews all the time to understand what's really a problem. So during that talk, from there, I figure out the requirements. What do I actually need to build to actually solve this problem? And then I iterate. I go back to those stakeholders I talked to. I'm like, hey, this is what I'm proposing. This is how I interpreted your pain points. If I built this, would this solve it? And many times they'll be like, actually, when I explained it, I didn't explain it right. And I think a great way is that data is very abstract. If you talk about a row of data, you can quickly say, oh, well, this person is XYZ demographics and they did this on this event log, right? You can talk about a row. Well, tell me about a million rows of data. And now your mind just kind of explodes. We understand insights and statistics, right? As a data person, we're able to navigate that. Non-data people, imagine they don't think about data like this all the time. They're gonna have a hard time explaining it. So you iterate back and forth, and that iteration step's really important because now they're a stakeholder bringing ideas to the solution, and now they have buy-in because they create their own solution to help it. So it's now their idea as well. Then you build it. That's where we're all excited about building a thing. But this is the most important part, is the evangelize piece. Once you've clicked that final submit, you merge the code, right? It's not done. You have to clearly explain to these stakeholders in the company broadly what was the pain point, what was the solution you brought with your data product, whether it be an ML solution or a dashboard or whatever it may be, and then how can they start using it today to solve their pain point. And if you can clearly get that evangelize piece down, people will love your product. And you build a communication platform to say like, well, hey, I'm glad you love this. What would you want to improve? This is a V1. What would you want for V2? And so ways I've done that is I create Slack channels. So for our customer success team, I created this thing called curated data. And now instead of them being like, hey, this is Mark's dashboard, or, hey, this is Mark's data, I'm like, no, it's not. It's data science data. Don't message me directly. Go into the curated data channel. And now we get a log of every pain point or success that's very visible to the company that we can use to prioritize what things to solve for. And so now when I build project briefs to ask for more data infrastructure, I go to that Slack channel and pull out use cases and say like, hey, well, we had this and we had that. We could solve these
That's
problems.
genius.
I have a question here. How much of your time as a data scientist would you say is spent like just writing code that's reused versus spending time with stakeholders and thinking through requirements, problems, and brainstorming solutions?
That's a good question. When I first became a data scientist, and when I was trying to become one, I literally thought I would be analyzing data and writing code all day long. And the reality is that's just not the case, especially as I got to the senior level. I'm more so thinking strategically of how data can impact the company. And that requires a lot of stakeholder management, building kind of relationships, and understanding pain points, understanding what the other priorities in the business are. Because I probably spend like 70% of my time more so talking to people. And it's not like 70% of my day. It's more so like I'll have some months where I'm doing a lot more research, understanding where are pain points and thinking more strategically. And then I might have a couple months where like I'm just coding heavily, implementing what I thought through, right? But many times before you start building things, you have to get that buy-in, and that buy-in takes time. And so I greatly look up to my manager. Shout out to Stephanie Tigner. She's the head of data science over at Humu. She's been at the company since the beginning, right? So she's been here for about 5 years now. And she's constantly planting seeds with other stakeholders of like what data could do. And many times those seeds don't bloom until like a year or two later. And I've seen, now that I've been here for 2 years, I've seen her talk about things to stakeholders. And then like a year later, stakeholder will be like, what if we had this, right? And so that ability to build those relationships and like build that what if with data, that requires a lot of talking to people and meeting people where they're at, especially if your data maturity is a little bit higher than other people around you. And that requires a lot of talking and a lot of strategic thinking through who do you talk with, how you figure out these pain points, how do you strategize about that. And so I think that's where a lot of that time comes in. Is like we move away from just being just an IC, just doing tickets, to an IC or technical leader thinking about how to drive the company forward. It's going to be through those relationship building and understanding what are the true pain points in the company within the market.
This is incredible, man. This is so cool. And I really look at it, it's like you're doing so much when it comes to like product management, data science, or just data product management. And I love how you're looking at things from from this holistic viewpoint and recognizing that data science or machine learning is so close to the business needs that you can never let that be too far away, too far out of reach, because as soon as you do that, you've missed the mark. And so it's great to see that you have that in the front of your mind continuously, whatever you're working on, and figuring out ways to make sure that you're getting the best use cases and tackling the right problems, and B, doing it in a way that is sustainable. So thanks. This has been great, dude. I appreciate it. Sadly, we got to end. Like, I could keep talking to you for a while.
It was super fun. It was super fun. Well, I make sure I go to the next meetup that you're there. Hopefully your flight doesn't get canceled again.
What a bummer.
And we could keep on talking.
There we go.
And whoever's listening, come to the meetups as well, because it's always a fun time.
That's true. We are having meetups in or around wherever you are. So there's somebody that's about to do a meetup in India. We've done them all over Europe, San Fran, New York. Somebody want to do one in Austin, we're open to it. I always need an excuse to travel, so reach out to us. Let's get a meetup on the books, or just look and see if there's a meetup happening near you. That's it for today. Thank you, Mark. This is awesome, man.
Thanks for having me.